Hello, everyone, and welcome again to another Teacher Joseph podcast. Well, today is Remembrance Day here in the UK, and it's the day when the UK commemorates those people who have died in war since World War One. So there's various ceremonies and traditions remembering those people who've died. There's a 2-minute silence at 11 a.m. There's a national service of remembrance. There's also small local services of remembrance around the country in most towns and villages. There's also a moment where flowers are laid at the war memorials, and there's one of those in most UK towns and villages. A military parade is usually part of that, as well as church services. And then there's usually a musical band which plays the bugle. Now, the bugle is like a very small trumpet which you hold in your hands, and they always play the last post. There's educational aspects to this. Schools across the UK usually participate in these services, and there's also a lot of public participation. The Remembrance Day services in the UK are characterised by being very solemn. Let me just give you a few other adjectives to describe them. Solemn, commemorative. Solemn, by the way, means marked by a serious and respectful atmosphere. Commemorative, serving as a way to remember and honour the fallen, as they refer to the dead. Reflective, encouraging deep thought and contemplation. Historical. Unified, because it brings people together. Traditional. Respectful. Ceremonial. And patriotic. Now, I have to say that I actually tried to make earlier podcasts to tell you about Remembrance Sunday, and I even attended the Remembrance Sunday parade in order to let you hear what it's like. But I don't really appreciate these parades, particularly this one, because it's probably the only one which is left and has been carried over from the days of the British Empire. And it doesn't really reflect what Britain is today. I mean, for me, the British flag is supposed to represent diversity, inclusion. It's supposed to represent a democracy where you can live your life in any way that you want, as long as you obey the law. But this ceremony, because it's so old, tends to be rather white. And if you look at the faces, they're obviously trying to include people of color, but it doesn't really represent who we are and how we live. So that means that it's very controversial and attracts a lot of anti-war sentiment. Some people view Remembrance Day as being about the military, and there's other people who really are looking for some kind of historical revaluation about the UK's military history and the British Empire. There's people like me who have issues around its inclusivity, as I mentioned earlier. Also, it's incredibly political because it's used by politicians to really push their own agendas. And in a multicultural society like the UK, there's many diverse people who live here from all over the world. And so to talk about how Britain once was, it's a little bit out of date. And also, people like me who are completely pacifist um, uh, oppose the traditional ways of commemorating Remembrance Day. I think probably it would be better if they spent the time building bridges and promoting peace rather than celebrating wars they've won. I mean, I think they're aware of this. They obviously have tried to change it a little bit so that it's now focused on troops and military personnel who are living abroad. But many of us don't like this idea of a almost completely white ceremony, which is supposed to represent Britain. It's a little bit out of date. You know, the British flag, the Union Jack, is a very important flag in this ceremony. And the British flag, for me, is supposed to represent all of the values of being British, about being diverse, about living in a multicultural society. But actually, for those of us who live in the UK, the flag is often used by British people as a way to protest against some of the people who are living here. For example, if I see the British flag in my neighbour's garden, I will know that my neighbour is making a statement that he doesn't like immigrants. And he's trying to say, well, I'm white and British, and my neighbour isn't. And so, therefore, when I see the British flag, I become very shy. I don't like it. I don't like seeing it. And I tend to avoid places where it's displayed, like British clubs and particularly um, social clubs and these kinds of things. So it's used to make a statement. It's also used for those people who don't want things like Scottish independence. They can put up a British flag to say they want to be British. So those are the pros and cons of Remembrance Sunday. I have to say, though, that for me, I'm rather ashamed of being British. When I travel, I really only tell people that I'm British for the purposes of finding work, or maybe the purposes of protecting myself if I get into any trouble. However, when people ask me, where do you come from? I'm a little bit shy, and I usually begin with, well, both my grandparents, or both sets of grandparents, were Irish, which is a little bit of an exaggeration because both of my grandmothers were Irish. Because I don't like saying I'm British. For me, it brings up this whole colonial British Empire idea of racism and these kind of things. So I don't really want to be associated with it. I think there's two types of people who live in the UK. There are those of us who are educated, who want to see Britain as part of something bigger, like the European Union, or maybe as a country which is existing next to others. And there are still those who believe that it's Great Britain, whose borders should be closed, and that's often reflected by the government. So these conflicting ideas don't always sit well together. This day also turns out to be a little bit aristocratic. And let me tell you what I mean by that. So, over the years, it's changed dramatically. When people used to have very strong ideas of nationalism, which, by the way, isn't fashionable anymore, they would happily go to the streets. They were British, after all. But these days, people are a little bit more shy with that, just like I am. So it's kind of like attending church. It's something which has evolved into only for the, let's say, the well-heeled. So walking through the streets today, many people wearing suits, looking very somber, obviously from, I would say, professional backgrounds, coming from the local church. It doesn't really reflect the rest of us. One thing I did notice, though, which was very sad, was that a few of them, immediately after the ceremony was finished, were heading for the pub. Others were walking into the local betting shop to gamble. And that shows me that even though they maybe are trying to capture days gone by, they certainly aren't very interested in principled living. We've spoken about principled living before, and that's when you bring all of your beliefs together to focus around a central point or central idea. So clearly, they're not really into that. If they were, they perhaps would be doing more to celebrate this day. I think building bridges of peace would be much better than some kind of military display walking through the streets, you know. And then, of course, part of that is to sing the national anthem, God Save the King. Now, I have to say, most of us here, do they really care? I think probably not. And I think that there needs to be some kind of dialogue about how our society remembers its past and also what it means to be British, because ceremonies like this are really don't represent most of us, and I would be rather ashamed if they represented me. So there needs to be some way to educate future generations about peace. But yeah, as you can hear, there's a complexity and diversity of opinions here on topics such as national history and identity. Yeah, I don't particularly enjoy telling people that I'm British, and I certainly wouldn't be rushing to the front of the queue with my passports in order to state my nationality. Yeah, I'm a little bit shy with that. So there we are. That's Remembrance Sunday. So just to go through some of these adjectives again, then solemn, commemorative, reflective for some people, historical, unified, although I think for affluent people, it certainly brings them together because it is the face of our institutions. It's a day when the government, the military, the church, and the royals all come together. But those are all of our kind of like official institutions, and I'm of the opinion that they need to be reevaluated or modernized somehow. But how that's done, I've no idea. It's probably something for the younger people to work out. Traditional, respectful, ceremonial, and the last one, patriotic. Yeah, times have definitely changed, I'm pleased to say. Well, that's it from me. I hope you've enjoyed this description. I would have loved to have brought you the live parade, but I just honestly couldn't bring myself to do it because I'm really not very British compared to others. It's quite clear that this parade was for maybe the more affluent people with a stronger sense of British identity than I have, and that's fine for them. But I don't think that they should expect all of us to follow on from that. I mean, the 2 minute silence at 11 a.m., I think for some people that's very important, but for others, well, we just don't care. That's the way it is, and it's time to move on. Well, that's my opinion. I hope you found that helpful. Let's talk again soon. See you all. Bye.